How about that? Neil and I have one thing in common. Our grandparents came to Ellis Island 125 years ago, and they came to a city where the predominant sound on the street were horses. And I'm sure that there are some people in the audience who share that recollection, although we weren't there. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our community's post-election panel discussion here at the library. This event is jointly sponsored by the library and the Wise Men of Westport Weston. And if you're a man and you're semi-retired or retired, you can get more information about the Wise Men at the table over there. Large audiences make me very nervous. Critical thinking is in short supply with too many of us. So today we're fortunate to be joined by a team of critical thinkers, professional media insiders to give us a peek behind the curtain at how well the media covered the 2024 election and its aftermath. And with the inauguration of the country's first felon just around the corner, that wasn't a political statement, it was just a fact. This should be quite a lively discussion. Some of the issues I hope to address include the need for more critical thinking, journalism under political pressure. Wow, who wrote this? Maintaining accuracy and truthfulness in reporting, preserving the public trust, combating deliberate misinformation and disinformation, and adapting to rapid information spread on digital platforms. So where do we go these days for honest, unbiased coverage of the news? It's a good question. Some years ago, when one of our Wise Men speakers, who happened to be a TV anchor, was asked that question, his answer was, quote, "When you find out, let me know." With crises everywhere in the media, it's hard to get an honest appraisal of where the United States stands in the world. Given the polarization of the American public, is the media reflecting or enhancing polarization? And on the issue of bias, are we self-selecting the news we receive based on which outlet we depend on for the truth? Is that what furthers a well-informed public, one manipulated by one side of the aisle or the other? And finally, and this is the question that I hope we'll answer definitively today, are we headed in the direction to do a better job? These and other questions are the subject of today's panel discussion, and our panelists can answer them, to quote my favorite TV police drama, Blue Bloods, from inside the Puzzle Palace. Please welcome our panel. Author and formerly an anchor with CNN and Fox News, Westport's own Alisyn Camerota. Veteran journalist and CNN morning host, John Berman. Veteran TV journalist Dave Briggs with tenure at CNN, Fox News, and lead anchor with Cheddar Business News Today. He used to be a professional tennis player. That's not true. And a man who truly needs no introduction, author, blogger extraordinaire, and lifetime Westporter, and my swimming student at Mahakano, Dan Woog. And since this is hopefully a teaching moment for all of us, in the front row, we are joined by two people charting the course forward for student journalists, Staples High School journalism teachers and co-advisor of the school's nationally recognized news magazine, Inklings News, Mary Elizabeth Fulco and Joseph Del Gobbo. They're seated next to two Inklings editors-in-chief, Nina Bowens and Lily Holgren, who are reporting a news story on, can you guess? Ladies? Since our two young journalists will undoubtedly be meeting and interviewing notables, I thought we might give them an up-close and personal experience of their future this afternoon. What do you suppose it might be? Maybe a little bit of stagecraft.
It is our privilege and honor to welcome to the forum Connecticut's three-term United States Senator,
the Honorable Richard Blumenthal.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm so excited by this incredible turnout and to be introduced by Nina and Lily, who are stars of the future. Thank you for your journalism experience, and a big round of applause for them. They are editors-in-chief of the Inkling News, and thank you to Mary Elizabeth Fulco and Joseph Del Gobbo for your leadership. I will tell you, in my own experience, my high school editorship was formative and transformative. It led me to a beginning career in journalism. I actually worked after editing the college newspaper for the Washington Post. I had a great career going, starting there on the obituary section, and then going to night police, and then to law school. But what I learned in that time is how important reporting and journalism is. It is literally the lifeblood of our democracy, and it is in danger as never before. Local reporting creates local awareness, local accountability, and I will tell you, national reporting is important. We have some real stars this morning. I'm honored to appear with them. Thanks to the Wiseman for bringing us together, but local reporting is so important. I'll give you just an example at the national level. We're gonna have a hearing this Tuesday on Pete Hegseth to be the Secretary of Defense in charge of 3.4 million people who are responsible for our national defense in the military and civilian, a budget of hundreds of billions of dollars, close to 900 billion. And the FBI report on his background apparently will be withheld from members of the Armed Services Committee. We will depend in part on reporting by journalists like the ones here on the stage to give us material about his lack of competence and character, his lack of preparedness and qualifications, which we will have to elicit during that committee hearing this Tuesday. That's an example from real life, contemporary events about how important reporting can be. But again, local reporting, as you know in Westport, is what reveals what's happening on the zoning commission, the first selectman's office. It is vital to democracy at our state level. And there are fewer newspapers now than ever before. We have a perfect storm for reporting, resulting from declining revenue, increasing costs, and exploding disinformation. And it is the result, in part, we're going to hear about it later in this program, of big tech and artificial intelligence. It is complicated, much too complicated for me to explain. Many of you know it, you've seen it in the brief time that I have, but essentially what's happening is that AI is using content from reporting and journalism, newspapers and broadcast, using it to train their language models and then to cannibalize readers and viewers, which in turn creates this vicious cycle, which is the reason why we need to right the balance right now between local reporting, whether it's on elections, and often it is, or any other topic, and big tech, which is using AI to compete unfairly. I've offered a measure called the Preservation of Competition in Journalism Act. It's bipartisan. I have done a framework on artificial intelligence with a colleague, Josh Hawley of Missouri, who is a Republican, as many of you know. This cause has to be bipartisan. It has to be bipartisan because otherwise, reporting and journalism on elections and most other topics is going to be strangled. You know, our democracy really depends on the truthful information. And Alisyn is wearing a sweater. Be truthful, not neutral. Be truthful, not neutral. That's exactly, in my view, what journalism has to be. But if Meta and Google can so dominate information, and without now any fact-checking, Meta's just announced, no more fact-checking, it can squelch the kind of truth-telling that we need in reporting and journalism. That is a kind of daunting way to begin this program, but I am more worried than ever, not just as a US Senator, but as a citizen, about what we will know in these next years about this administration, how much truth we will be told, and who will be there to do the fact-checking that is absolutely essential in a democracy. It can't come from the US Senate. It can't come from the US House of Representatives. It has to come from smart, aggressive, vigorous reporting. And that's why this panel and this program are so important. Again, thank you to the wise men. Thank you to the Westport Library, my favorite library in the whole world. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Senator, for those comforting words.
Thank you.
Nothing like being thrust into the middle of things. I made a deal with the panel. I was not going to assign individual people to answer questions, but rather we were going to have a free-for-all. Alisyn asked me whether I was used to herding cats. I am not. But they are far more qualified to answer the questions than I am to ask them. So if I ask a question that doesn't agree with you, please answer the question that I should have asked. The 2024 election was like no other in recent memory, unless you count 2016 and 2020. How large a role did polarization play, both in the country and in the media's coverage of the election? And if you would just raise your microphone to speak, we will assume you're ready.
Okay, I guess I'll go first, and I'll throw out my controversial position that you guys can argue with me about. So I would say that polarization was the deciding factor in the 2024 election. I know that a lot of people, and respect to my friend James Carville, think it was the economy stupid. I don't think so, and the reason I don't think so is because by the time of Election Day, the price of eggs had come way down, the price of gas had come way down from their inflationary highs, unemployment was at historic lows. So I believe that misinformation is what the main factor of Donald Trump's win was. And I think that I put those two things, polarization and misinformation, for me go hand in hand, because polarization means that you get your news and information from one echo chamber. And if you were watching Fox or if you were listening to right-wing podcasts, you were fed a steady diet every day, segment after segment after segment, about the horrors of immigration and the dangers of wokeness, all the time. And it was often riddled with just falsehoods, obviously. Falsehoods, tons of misinformation. I do an exercise where I force myself to listen to some of that, and I think that some of you do too, just to see what's going on. And it's stomach churning, the amount of misinformation. But if you don't know that, I mean, if that's your steady diet, then that's what you're voting on. Whereas if you were just listening to, say, CNN or MSNBC or the three networks, you heard a lot of stories on the dangers of democracy failing, basically the threats to democracy. So we are in totally different media bubbles, and I think that the polarization is what was the driving factor.
Okay, I respectfully entirely disagree with that. I think polarization is the biggest problem facing our country. I do agree with that. I do not believe it had really anything to do with the outcome of this election. I think the media should take some responsibility for, let's backtrack before that, and ignoring the mental decline of a commander-in-chief, of a president of the United States. Now, it was not the economy. It was certainly not the economy. James Carville is wrong there. The Economist, who is, I think, the most respectful source about the economy, wrote, "The U.S. economy is the envy of the world and has never been stronger." In late September, early October, the economy has been ripping throughout the Biden administration. But I do not believe polarization impacted this election. I think people know what they voted for. They absolutely, they know what happened on January 6th. They just don't care. Now, maybe that is a problem of polarization. But I do not think that is why people ran to the polls. I think, largely speaking, the Democratic Party needs to do some, with all due respect, needs to consider how that process went. It wasn't our country. It was Joe Biden selecting whom he thought should be the party's nominee, and he had been in mental decline for several months. And I think had they had an actual electoral process to nominate who should lead the Democratic Party, I think we'd have a different president today. So polarization is a massive problem. I just don't believe one that led to the outcome of the election.
John, what's the media's job? Every morning you get up, you get dressed, you go to the office, and you stand in front of a microphone. What are you trying to accomplish? Are you notifying the public, or are you swaying the public?
Oh, that's a softball, because the answer is notifying. Your job isn't to sway the public. We're not trying to convince the public of one thing or another, other than we are telling them what is actually going on in the country, or in some cases, what just went on in the country. The news business, I think as you all know, has fundamentally changed over the last 20, 30 years. It used to be that there was a broadcast at 6:30 at night, and you would tune in to watch what happened. What happened, as in past tense, during the day. Now, I venture to say there's no one in this room who doesn't know what has happened. We all know what has happened pretty quickly. So if you're tuning in at any time of the day, what you want to know is what is happening, literally what is happening, like right now, as you're tuning in, and also the context of why it's happening. And that's where things get complicated, and that's where this discussion that you just heard between Alisyn and Dave, that's the meat of that discussion, and where I think you can take sides one way or another. Why is what is happening? Why is Donald Trump winning this election? And by the way, in terms of what the media got right and got wrong in this election, I actually think we were pretty spot on for most of it. If you watch the coverage day in and day out for the last 2 years, you know, Biden was never winning. Biden was sort of always losing. And then when he got out, Trump was mostly ahead or close, and everyone was telling you that no one should have been surprised on election day that the outcome was what it was. No one, I think, who was watching the news day in and day out didn't know what issues were the most important to the American people, because the American people kept on telling us. It was they said it was the economy. Now, whether or not that was actually how they voted, I think there is room for that discussion that Alisyn's having there. Sometimes it's hard to tell people how they feel. If they feel like the economy is not good, it's hard to tell them, no, it is really good. Listen to Dave Briggs. He says it's the best economy it's ever been. It's complicated, and inflation makes it even more complicated.
But I guess I would say that if you were watching CNN, you didn't necessarily know how exercised half of the voting public was about immigration.
Did we not? We certainly didn't cover immigration the way Fox News did, but I think if, we weren't on the border every day showing people coming in, but I do think that when you poll the American people by and large say that immigration is one of the biggest problems. So if we weren't reporting on it, we didn't pull a fast one on them. We didn't put the wool over their eyes. They knew what they cared about.
And I'm not even saying, John, that CNN didn't report on it accurately. I'm saying that they didn't know how exercised the Fox News viewers were about it. So that's why I think that I'm guessing there were some people in this crowd who were surprised on Election Day.
You shouldn't have been. Honestly, if you'd been paying attention in immigration in terms of polarization, and I think polarization's a problem in this country and has been for a long, long time. I'm not sure it was worse this election than in others. I actually think there's more agreement than there's been in a long time about immigration and the problems that are surrounding some of the processes. There's agreement on fixing the asylum system, where I'm not sure there necessarily would have been as much a few years ago. So, look, in terms of what our job is, whether to inform or sway, it's absolutely inform. I think one of the problems is you have to have an audience that wants to be informed, and you have to have an audience that wants to find out what the truth is. And I don't know how many people now who turn on cable news, any one of the cable news outlets, really haven't made up their minds already on certain things.
Well, just a quick note, 70% of the cable news viewers today are watching Fox News at any one time, 70%. So that just gives you a sense of who is watching cable
But that's
news
not just
today.
to quote someone we all know and love. Our competition at CNN, and I don't want to make this about one outlet or another, has never really been Fox News. People aren't choosing between Fox and CNN. If you're a CNN watcher, you're choosing between CNN and the football games that are on today, or you're choosing between CNN and a cooking show, or you're choosing between CNN and reading a book, or now you're choosing between CNN and TikTok. There aren't that many people out there who are going to turn on the TV and say, hey, who do I want to be informed by today? Is it CNN or is it Fox? I don't believe there are that many people like that out there.
Let me just give a little perspective of someone who is on the receiving end. First of all, the question notifying or swaying is an old question. Because we're dealing with a different universe now, where a major presidential candidate and Senate candidates can tell you it's snowing outside. And 70% of the world is going to be told it's snowing outside. And what's also happening is that more and more of the people who are getting information are getting it from sources other than any of the cable news, any of the newspapers that you read. It is, in fact, TikTok, social media, which brings me back to big tech and the growing power of Meta, Google, X, all of these sources of information, which more and more, and I think perhaps our editors can tell us more about how their contemporaries get their news, but more and more for people who are in high school and college and 30 to 35 years old are the source of their information. What really strikes me about this election and about the first weeks of the President-elect's administration is the disruption, the drama, the effort to shake things up, bring something totally different, and to play on, and here's what I really think is at work here in a very frightening way, anger, grievance, fear. Anger, grievance, fear. Now, This audience may not feel it in the same way, but in parts of Connecticut, as well as parts of the country, people are angry and they are fearful. They're angry about the price of butter, groceries, gas, cars. They can be told, inflation's down. That means nothing to them if they are living paycheck to paycheck and they feel prices are higher, and they're right, they are higher. If they feel job opportunities for their kids are lower than they were for them. The American dream is always, we work hard, our kids will do better. That dream is vanishing for a lot of Americans. Can't buy houses, can't buy cars. They need more of the kinds of skills and training that will enable them to have good careers. And we need those people to work at Electric Boat and Sikorsky and Pratt & Whitney. We need them for our national defense. But the anger and grievance that people feel is the result of all of these issues, including immigration, maybe unfairly and irrationally, because immigrants do not take Americans' jobs, but it is a sense of the other taking over, something they cannot fully grasp or control, as maybe prior generations felt that they could. And that fear and anger, I think, is at the source of a lot of these issues.
The senator has given me a perfect segue into a word that I learned in marketing. The word is glocal. It's a combination of local and global. And there's one person on this panel who is uniquely positioned to talk about that. The reporting of local news and its implications on a national scale.
I think people felt all those emotions that the senator was talking about in Westport, feeling angry, feeling stressed. And they came to 06880, my local blog, to escape that. They wanted to read about what's happening locally. And I really was not planning to cover the presidential election unless it impacted in a specific way Westport. And two stories really stood out. The first was a guy who lives at Longshore and has a golf cart. And on the back of his golf cart, he put a very large Trump banner, because if you're for Trump, you need a very large banner. And he would ride around the golf course, and people thought he was an employee. And he wasn't, but he didn't disabuse anybody of that notion. And somebody came and ripped that banner off the back of his golf cart. And I reported on that. And I reported then subsequently when he got in a real verbal, almost physical altercation with somebody, and they were dropping F-bombs about who would blow whose head off. And it was a story that involved everything we're talking about, free speech and the rights of, who can say what, where. And the second story was a neighbor on Maple Avenue North who had a sign out front that said, honk for Trump. So everybody who drove by who was for Trump honked. And this disrupted the neighbors. And they went to court. And the court ruled in their favor that he had to take down the sign because it was disruptive, but the sign itself was okay for free speech. So he took down that sign. Then he put up a sign that said, pedophiles for Harrison Walls, which is kind of weird. It inferred that he was a pedophile, but so be it. But that, too, was a story about civility. It was a story about neighborliness. So all these things we're talking about on a national scale were here in Westport, and I was commenting on them.
One of the things that comes up over and over again are the two scariest words in journalism these days: fake news. It has tainted the information pool to its core. When you talk about deliberate misinformation and disinformation reaching the public, is that a lack of editorial awareness? Are individual outlets bending the truth to their own purposes? Or is it just lack of the public's paying attention?
If I could get back to something the senator started with, as much as I think it's great that we're going to talk about cable news and traditional news, I think the most consequential decision made for media and for truth in the next 30 years is the decision made by Mark Zuckerberg a week ago to do away with, if you missed it, do away with fact-checking entirely and allow a community notes type of system similar to X. And if anyone's been on X or Twitter, it has become a garbage dump of misinformation and hateful content. I believe it's the most consequential decision made since Roger Ailes changed news forever and began taking advantage of what he saw as a business opportunity in forming Fox News. This terrifies me because more and more people outside of this room, I wish more of those kids were down here. I wish 10 times the Inkling staff was here because you guys are the ones who are going to change this system. Social media is it. News, I'm happy that we have had a great career and there might be another couple of years left of cable news and news as we know it. And I'm glad you're able to put your kids through college. But
I'm
look,
hanging on. I'm hanging on.
everyone gets their information from social media. Everyone in this crowd has had a conversation over the past year in which you look across the table and go, are you completely batshit crazy? And I have had conversations with intelligent, college-educated people where they get information, God knows where, no resemblance to truth, and arguing with them is impossible because they read it somewhere. I don't know how your generation is going to fix this, but it is going to be the challenge in terms of the word truth for the next 20 or 30 years. I hope there is a social media network that is formed that is a trusted voice, because I don't think there is one left. I don't think there is a single trusted source out there, and I am terrified. Just any given day, 3 billion people are on the platforms of Meta. 3 billion between Facebook and Instagram. No more fact checking.
Well,
Just think about that for a moment and the consequences.
I hear you, but I would just take issue with, I don't know if Facebook's job was to fact check. They're a social media network. And so I think it does send a shiver down my spine like yours that they're not going to be. I wish they were. That would be what they should do for the good of civilization. However, it's journalists' job. And I think that to answer your question, John, we need to remind people, I think for too long we've taken it for granted that everyone knows what the rules of news are and what the rules of journalism. There are hard and fast, tried and true rules. But I don't think that the people who are watching Fox necessarily know them or could recite them. And I know a lot of people who are working at Fox can't. And so the fact that you need to have at least 2 rock solid sources, that's one of the rules that we go by, hopefully more, but you need to know those sources. They need to have proven their bona fides before you put them on air. This is why Fox News had to pay $787 million in a settlement because they put crackpots on the air who spewed garbage. That's not news, that's not journalism. So I feel like, John, part of the way to fight fake news, the moniker of fake news that we've been labeled with, and I do really resent it, and I do think that it has been really pernicious and had a horrible effect on news, is to just remind people, and I mean, this is what the journalists, the young journalists here in the room are learning, just what the rules are that we follow and how we're following them. I think CNN has done a great job of peeling back the curtain more about this, where they say, we have talked to 17 sources for this story. We've talked to people inside and outside the administration. We like that giving a little more transparency about the reporting, I think, helps the viewers.
But we've got a whole generation that has grown up without, many of them not even watching CNN or Fox or MSNBC.
Damn you.
That's 2 years. You got 2 years.
Not yet.
At the most. That's really the reality. They're getting their news from other places, and they don't know what the rules of journalism are, and that's really, really frightening.
Let me just observe what I think one of the geniuses of Donald Trump has been over the last 10 years. I think Alisyn's heard me quote this British philosopher ethicist before, but Bertrand Russell had this metaphor, which he called Russell's teapot. He was a British thinker. And what he said is, if someone is going to say that there is a teapot, a literal teapot orbiting the earth, it's on that person to prove it. It's not on everyone else to disprove it. And what Donald Trump, I think, has done successfully is he's thrown so many teapots up into the sky that it forces journalists to make a choice. Are we going to fact check every single teapot that he says is up there? And if we focus on this teapot, are we not giving credence to the whole notion of it? Or do we ignore it and hope that people don't pay attention? Well, I will say that actually neither choice works great. They're both flawed in their own ways. So fact-checking in general, when I hear people give up on fact-checking, boy, do I find that disheartening. I think it's a real problem. We still do it at CNN. Fact-checkers are mocked. Go on social media and look at the way that fact-checkers are mocked as these, charlatans, when all they're trying to do is tell you the truth. There are some things that are objectively true, and fact-checkers should try to prove it. But I will say it is a challenge. Should we? Do you think? Let me just get a show of hands here. Every ridiculous thing that's said out loud, do you think we should take time in an hour-long newscast to play the sound of the ridiculous claim and then to meticulously disprove it with 5 or 6 sources? Who says yes? Raise your hands if say yes. Oh, really? Not many. How about no? How are you deciding a ridiculous claim? Well, let me say, okay, and I'm choosing this, and I really don't want to get overly political here, but I think this is easy to say and it's factually just true. They're eating the cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio. They're eating the cats and dogs, okay? That is objectively false. It is not true. Now, how much time do you think it's worth 10 minutes in a broadcast to prove that they're not eating the cats and dogs? Yes, Dave Briggs says yes?
That one, yes.
That one, yes? Others say yes? Yeah, I mean, some of it's not, there's not a black and white. Probably yes, to a certain extent, but I promise you, the 10 minutes that you've spent disproving that they're eating cats or dogs, or 10 minutes that Donald Trump and his campaign were thrilled you were spending on that subject. That's the conundrum that faces us a lot of the time. It's not as easy as just saying, yeah, we should go out and fact check every last thing.
Or to give you a different example, should the news focus its attention on whether we're going to buy Greenland, invade Panama, declare Canada as our 51st state, or
Rename the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America.
or on nominees Pete Hegseth, Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, who are really outside the realm of what used to be realistic nominees, qualified and prepared, people of character and competence. Immense distractions. And, I sympathize with people like yourselves who have to make this judgment about how to use scarce time, which is really scarce attention. There are just so many eyeballs who are willing to spend time watching, and you don't have the resources necessarily to do all the fact checking. Meta does, Google does, OpenAI, Microsoft, they have resources. They have the billions of dollars. And Mark Zuckerberg has chosen not to do fact checking. And it's not financial judgment, it's a political judgment.
Considering that, and everything that's been said about fact-checking and the accuracy of news reporting. The most dramatic change in reporting, the immediacy and extraordinary volume of information that's available. How should news outlets cover politicians who employ social media and rapid dissemination of information? Fact-checking is off the table, evidently, in social media. Where does that leave us?
Well, I have some very strong opinions on how I should be covered.
Why am I not surprised?
But Senator, you guys had hearings recently about social media, and the country's attention was galvanized. And it appeared to be a shiny object because nothing came out of it. Nothing changed. No rules, no guardrails. You remember those hearings. You were very vocal on them.
Well, let me just say about social media, and again, I hate to be repeating, but I think one of the biggest threats to our young people these days is, in fact, the toxic content that social media is driving at them. And my priority in the last United States Congress, and it will be again in this one, is the Kids Online Safety Act, which would provide some protections to kids, some tools to parents, a duty of care imposed on social media, and transparency on the algorithms that drive this toxic content, bullying, eating disorders. I think you can tell us something about what your contemporaries say about it, addictively at kids. And in the same way, social media is used to drive misinformation at audiences that are even older. So I'm gonna reintroduce the Kids Online Safety Act, but you know, the technology is moving so quickly. And we haven't talked about it, and most of us, I'll admit I don't, understand how algorithms work, how technology is driving the ability to do not only fake news, but also fake images, impersonations. There will be a day, and it may be right now, when John Berman's image can be put on social media saying something that is in his voice.
We're already there.
And will be totally false. Something he said about Donald Trump or Richard Blumenthal with the background of CNN, used in an ad without there being the requirement that it be identified as the result of artificial intelligence. That day is not far off. And, you know, as Mark Twain said about lies and the truth, a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth gets its shoes on out of bed. And this kind of technology, I think, has to be in some way regulated. And I will tell you, there's bipartisan feeling about it. I mentioned earlier, Josh Hawley and I have a framework on artificial intelligence, but when we talk about fake news, we also have to talk about deep fakes, deep fake impersonations, deep fake images, and that's going to be another challenge for the CNNs and all of our sources of information.
So will we see Congress regulating it at some point soon?
If Donald Trump, and I'm just being very blunt here, if Donald Trump and Elon Musk and the oligarchs, and we're seeing some of the big tech oligarchs, I won't go through the slew of names, if they can get behind it, we will. And if we can have some bipartisan cooperation, we will. And I'm working very hard across the aisle with members of the United States Senate who feel the same sense of urgency and apprehension that I do. And it's doable. It's politically doable if we have buy-in from the administration.
Another perfect segue. Dave, you asked me about TikTok. Talk to us about TikTok.
Well, look, TikTok has 9 days left, so it's relatively inconsequential. No, I mean, I genuinely do believe it is on its last, 8 or 9 days left. It was clear no one probably watched the Supreme Court oral arguments on
It's because
Friday.
there aren't cameras in the courtroom because the court's trying to
Right, but we
put
know
the wool over our eyes.
Well, we know everything that was said.
Yes,
I'm sure
yes.
John paid attention like I did to these arguments. And all the justices you might think would side otherwise, clearly to me, were siding with Congress and the people like Senator Blumenthal and buying the national security threat argument. With the exception of one incredibly naive statement from Gorsuch that, I don't know if you watched, he said, I don't see how this is any different than a newspaper controlling your data. I thought, was he living in 1975? But I do think TikTok is on its last few days, which makes that meta decision so much more important because, again, I hate to keep pointing to inklings and that next generation, Gen Z, they get their information from TikTok. It's not all misinformation. I was thrilled to talk to my son this week about the fires, my 12-year-old about the political environment. I could not believe the information they had. Most of it was actually pretty accurate. And they never watch the news and have never read a newspaper. They get their information solely from TikTok and Instagram. And I was actually pretty pleased. I think probably Westport kids are far more better trained to spot misinformation than most kids in the United States. So I am happy to hear that there is some actual news being reported on those platforms. TikTok is everything today. And if it does survive, which I believe Donald Trump wants it to because he thinks it's one giant reason he got elected, I think it's very dangerous. I've talked to many national security experts that feel it's that simple, that China just simply turn a crank and misinform. I don't buy the number that 170 million Americans are active on the platform. That's about half the country. But how many people are in this room are on TikTok? Exactly. There is no way.
This is not TikTok's audience.
Right, but 170 million would imply half the country. So you would have more hands than that raised, right? You would just, the average would show you more hands are up. But I do believe it's one of the most
Ask the
important
question
decisions
about
happening.
their children or grandchildren.
Sure, which implies 9 out of 10 of them are, if only 10 people in this room are. That ban ahead of the Supreme Court is going to be one of the most important decisions made in the next 20 or 30 years. I do believe it will be banned. Do you agree with that?
It sounds like the Supreme Court's going to let the ban go through. I think where the rubber meets the road here. So for those who haven't been following closely, Congress, in a bipartisan way, and there were actually a lot of bipartisan things passed in the last 4 years, and this is one of them, voted that TikTok has to be sold by its Chinese parent company by the 19th, or it will be shut down. And the way it's shut down isn't that it'll be erased from all your kids' or grandkids' phones. It's that they won't be able to download updates. People will still be able to watch TikTok for a while, but over the course of time, it will just sort of melt away. That happens
over the next year. It would be inoperable.
In a year, it would be up. But this all happens the 19th, and the reason it was the 19th was because Congress passed this law so that it would happen no matter who won the next election. Now, what Donald Trump does with it on the 20th is interesting because could he somehow not enforce the law? Could he have his Justice Department not prosecute things? He really doesn't want it to be banned, we think. So we'll have to see how it all plays itself out. Or can he find some rich friends who want to buy it and convince the Chinese to sell it?
Well, he already has. They will not sell it, and they've been very clear they will not sell this app. They believe the algorithm is just too valuable.
I will say, but
they will never sell that
once
app.
the Supreme
Don't hold
Court
your
makes a decision, who knows? Maybe it's a different scenario if they can find Pats.
But I think that we're focused too much on TikTok, although I recognize how influential it is. I guess my point, what I think is that we're already there. It's already happening. Everybody is already going to have to go to their own individual trusted source. The media landscape is so balkanized at this point that whether it's TikTok or whether it's CNN or whether it's Substack or whether it's wherever the newspaper, wherever you're getting your news, you're already curating it for yourself. And that's what the next generation is already doing as well. There, as you say, there are trustworthy people on TikTok. So it's back to what you first said, John, about critical thinking. And this scares me because I don't think that everybody is a natural critical thinker. And I don't think that we are necessarily teaching people how to be critical thinkers. And we do take it for granted. But basically, you all have your own trusted sources. For instance, let's say Substack, Heather Cox Richardson. That's a great, smart Substack that I read regularly. She's not on cable news, she's not on TikTok. I'm just seeking her out. And that's what we're all starting to do. And so it's really splintered. And I don't know what new kind of alliances all of this different media bubbles will form, but we're already there, whether or not TikTok is banned. It's happening.
Alisyn, there's another element, which is that half of the country doesn't think critical thinking is good. They have clearly sent the message that an educated populace, deep thinking is bad.
Yeah, they go with their gut. They like their gut. You know, how often do you hear that? I just go with my gut.
We're not suggesting a political line. Is that what you're saying, that one party chooses not to critical think? I hope you're not saying that.
Dave.
Because no, I genuinely do not.
I think...
Because that is really unfortunate if you believe that.
I believe that there is a substantial majority of the people in this country, who have been, for whatever reason, believe that critical thinking is not important. Let me put it that way.
I genuinely believe, and the numbers prove out, and John, the people at CNN will tell you this, the largest party by a long shot in this country is the middle. Independents are easily the biggest party in this country, and I think misinformation exists on both sides of the aisle, in the extreme right and the extreme left, and it is equally as big a problem.
Well, I just want to say one thing, Senator, which is that the good news is that we all carry around little encyclopedias now in our pockets called cell phones, and you can fact check anything in the space of about 30 seconds. And so when I've forced myself to listen to some right-wing podcasts, I'm astonished, and I don't know, I'm not talking Republican versus Democrat, but I do mean right-wing, because I do think that right-wing stuff is particularly awash in disinformation and misinformation.
But not the left wing. I'm just curious if that's what
give me a left-wing podcast.
Well,
Give me an
unfortunately, all the popular podcasts are on, for the most part, the right.
Right. So, I mean, I just mean like some of the most popular podcasts that I've listened to. And the things that they're saying have been already debunked. They've been debunked. That the outrage machine that they're cranking up, they have been debunked months ago, or you could debunk it in 30 seconds on your phone. And they don't do it. So to Dan's point, they are, avoiding studiously critical thinking.
Let me first tell you an old story which I love to quote about Adlai Stevenson, who was campaigning for president, an ill-fated attempt to win against Dwight Eisenhower. And he was making a speech somewhere in the country, and somebody shouted out from the crowd, "Adlai, you are the candidate of all thinking people." And he said, "Yes, madam, but I need a majority." So, I'm a politician. By the way, I'm proud to be a politician. I think we need more people to get involved in politics. Hopefully Nina and Lily, hopefully as many of you have done over the course of your lifetime, get your hands dirty and encounter some of the vitriol. It's never been more vicious, never been more nasty, that we see on social media, and people say the quiet part out loud now as never before. But my job is to talk to those people. And it's your job, too. We need to get outside our bubbles and talk to the people who have different views, because they're Americans, too. And that's the strength of our democracy. We protect the First Amendment.
I just want to add one quick note about getting outside your bubbles. Again, I'm a business journalist now and had on a man who has started a real estate company that's run by AI. And he said the most popular search by a factor of 10 on his website is people aren't able to go to his website and find the political affiliation of the neighborhood in which they're going to move. That is easily the most popular search on their AI filter, in which people only want to live by Republicans and Democrats only want to live by Democrats. And I said to you, aren't you terrified about adding to polarization? And he kind of said, yeah, but we're just giving them information. That is where we are. Again, both sides of the aisle, we want to live by people that echo our opinions and thoughts.
And just, this is off topic a little bit, but because I do agree that critical thinking is one of the most important things out there, and I think it is sort of a waning skill that people have. We spent the last 20 years telling all our kids not to study history or English and study STEM stuff, you know, computer programming, science, and math. And as a result, they're really good at science and math and computer programming, but you know, they can't write a complete sentence punctuated the correct way, and they can't tell you who the president was in 1953. And I think that's a real problem, and I implore all, this is, again, I was terrible at math and science, so I'm biased here. But let's make the humanities great again, right? And
oh, that's gonna be a popular message bumper sticker.
I think so. To get your, you know, get your kids studying stuff that will help them make their own decisions.
Let's make humanity great again.
That's it.
Touche.
I want to thank you all for using your indoor voices.
I just want to add one more point, because
Shoot.
I don't want to leave here overly pessimistic. You know, one of the things I do as a United States Senator, I did it for 20 years when I was Attorney General, is go to the immigration and naturalization ceremonies. I don't know how many of you have been to one of them. They happen every Friday in Connecticut in our courtrooms. I was there just yesterday. I go because it restores my faith. And every time I go, there are tears in my eyes. There are usually 60 people in a group who've come to this country because it is a beacon of opportunity and freedom. And I am allowed, judges allow me to make a little speech, and I thank them for becoming US citizens. I tell them, you will never take it for granted because you've come here. Literally, they come from all over the world, from Ukraine, Russia, China, you know, everywhere. And I say, you'll never take it for granted. You took a test to become a United States citizen that most Americans couldn't pass.
What I just said.
And just like you, they smile or laugh. But it's true. And you look at that group, and they're, by the way, they're there with their children, their in-laws, their parents. It's like one of the great days of their lives. They're becoming a citizen of the United States of America. And they are going to be active. They're going to serve on juries. They are going to vote. They're going to be critical when we screw up. And it's our diversity that is our strength, but also, I think, information is what they crave and what they can't get in most of the countries where they live. And, you know, I am deeply worried about our democracy. I think it's in greater risk now than at any point in my lifetime. I'm hopeful because of those people who are coming to this country and those people who are here who want to be critical thinkers. But the dangers are really clear and present unless everybody, and again, I say it to everyone in this room, accepts the challenge of talking to people outside that bubble, outside that neighborhood. Not just asking CNN to do it, but to do it ourselves. And, you know, there are more opportunities now. Anywhere, most people in this room could, in effect, be a mini broadcaster. You know, there's so many more opportunities now. The splintering of our media market and media opportunities, given more opportunities for people to, in effect, affect public opinion.
This morning there was a new book introduced on CBS this morning, it was a large number of famous American immigrants, written by Newt Gingrich. And the list was stunning. Okay, now that we've introduced these 5 knowledgeable people and established the media's current profile, fractured though it may be, let's take a look at how the next generation is being prepared for effectively playing their role in the world as they begin their careers in journalism. Please welcome Staple High School journalistic faculty members and Inkling's co-advisors, Mary Elizabeth Fulco and Joseph Del Gobbo. They're going to talk about moving forward with their graduating journalists. The podium is yours.
Thank you to the wise men for inviting us here. As I was preparing to speak a little bit about the future of journalism, I couldn't help but reflect on the past for a moment. I was hired about 10 years ago to teach journalism at Staples High School and to co-advise Inklings, which at the time was a traditional newspaper and a website, and has since morphed into a news magazine, a website, a TV show, and, of course, social media. We'd still fact check though, I promise. I was thinking about my second interview where I was being told about what my job would entail, and there were 2 advanced journalism classes, and I would be co-teaching them with Ms. Fulco. And the reason that I would be co-teaching them and not just teaching them was because each course, each class had 50 students. And I was taken aback. 50 students in a classroom, I didn't know how they would all fit. The answer is not well. It's a little chaotic, but all good newsrooms should be. I was so impressed with the number of students who were interested in journalism, who were passionate about journalism, who were willing to give up a free period where they could be sleeping in, but instead were taking this additional course because they wanted to pursue journalism. And I was so excited to be in a school and in a community that valued journalism to the extent to which they do. 10 years later, I am still excited, I am still impressed by my students, their professionalism, their willingness to take on controversial and difficult stories, but stories that are important to the school and that are important to them and important to the community. Today, they're gonna speak about one of those stories. We too covered the election, but we focused more on a local scale. And so Lily and Nina will tell you how we went about our job as journalists.
Hello again. Once again, my name is Nina, and this is Lily.
Yes, so today we're going to talk to you about a recent project that we did for our social media back a few months ago. So in Inklings, once a month, our editorial board, which is led by Nina and me, we meet and we discuss a relevant issue that is impacting our community. So back in October, we knew that for our editorial, we really wanted to focus on the upcoming election. But rather than focusing on the national elections, we really wanted to put an emphasis on local elections, since that would be what our readers, which is primarily Staples, as well as the Westport community, would be most impacted by.
Exactly. We'll leave the national election up to you guys. So when we tasked the editorial board with researching local politicians running for Connecticut's Congress, our students actually either found only really biased websites made for the politicians' campaign, or lacked any information at all on their accomplishments, who they were as people. And as a lot of our peers in senior year are new voters, this was kind of detrimental to our readers, so we decided to take on that task.
Right, so we were inspired to tackle a debate that would be happening, and it was organized by the Westport Journal and hosted at Greens Farms Academy, and it would be between 2 candidates that were running for the Connecticut House of Representatives, Jonathan Steinberg and John Bolton. And so we decided to cover that debate and do a little promotion for it as well, where we'd kind of get to know the candidates.
So as we just heard from our lovely panelists, the evolution of journalism has led many of our peers to turn to social media to get their news, and I would just like, for the record, to show that I personally do not have TikTok downloaded, which is usually looked down upon by my peers, but I actually feel proud today. So rather than a story for our website, Lily and I turned to Instagram, which is projected here, as you can see, to introduce these pivotal candidates to the high school community. And we met with both the incumbent Democrat, Jonathan Steinberg, as well as the challenger Republican, John Bolton, as well as the moderators, Dory Horton and Danielle Dobin-Smith.
So our final project culminated in a 9-minute video that was stretched across 6 separate Instagram reels. And it was really cool because the Instagram videos themselves, they amassed, thousands of views, which is very cool for us. But it was also really important because we really got to see how, our videos on Instagram could really, allow new voters, to allow old voters, to allow future voters as well, to really get to know the candidates. And it was very impactful for us to do this, especially when you're interviewing both candidates, so you get both sides of the story and really just bring this to the community.
Exactly. So as an organization, as Inklings, regardless of the age or experience of our reporters, we hope to continue to be a trustworthy outlet, regardless of Meta getting rid of fact-checking, and for the Staples and for the Westport community, ranging from unbiased political reporting or to high school sports recaps. So we actually have a reporter here, Anna Kircher. If you want to visit inklingsnews.com later in the week, who will be covering this event with a little bit of background, interviews behind the panelists and who they are. So yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, as you can see, the future of journalism could be bright. They are passionate, they're talented, they're dedicated, and I am so privileged to be teaching this generation. But it's true, and what the panelists have talked about is that we are facing changing times. And we're facing changing values. And that is very clear with the reflection of local presses closing in most towns throughout America. We went to Philadelphia for the National Scholastic Press Association conference, where high school presses from all over the country gather. And there was a very common story that the high school presses were the local presses. They were coming from towns where their papers were extinct. Westport, thankfully, at least for now, is an exception. And it's amazing that in this small town, we have at least 3 professional local news outlets with 06880, the Westport Journal, and the Westport Local Press, and Inklings News as well, with 70+ members who take our classes, who are taking the club. But we can only publish with the continued support and interest of the public. I think that journalism reflects your values. You hold journalists accountable. You choose if you subscribe. You choose if you tune in. And if you don't like what is happening, you need to hold them accountable. And unfortunately for us, as a newspaper, we face another reality of print going extinct, printers shutting down. In fact, our longtime printer, Trumbull Printing, just recently informed us that they would no longer be able to print Inklings. And that led us into a scramble of trying to find someone who is still going to print our magazine. Local businesses are not advertising as much in print. They're more interested in the web, in social media. We need readership. We need support. We need the public tuning into our websites, showing the viewer numbers going up, so that we can attract advertisers on our websites. We need you to subscribe. Show us that you care, as I know you all do, because you're here today. So to keep local news alive, to uphold our democracy, please do as you continue to do. Please continue to instill your values in the next generation. And by your example, the future of journalism will stay bright. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Raise your hand if you choose her as your teacher. So
My
now,
son get a good grade in your class? My son took her class. How'd he do?
Oh, I'm recruiting him.
Okay.
Sure.
So there you have it, the media past, present, and certainly future. Thank you for your candid observations and insightful commentary, recognizing that even though you have a lot of help to do your jobs, you do make it look easy. And now, our guests, God help them, will take some of your questions. The highly disciplined library facilitator will be standing at the microphone over there, hook in hand. Please keep your questions concise and to the point. And please, one to a customer. This is not a White House press briefing, and there are no follow-ups. So, take a short walk over to the podium and ask your question. And we'll give you a chance to get there.
Good afternoon. I'm a volunteer reading coach at a local elementary school. And I've been doing this for about 10 years, and almost all my students are children of immigrants. And every parent I met comes here and they want to improve their lives, help their family, work hard, get ahead. Why are we so afraid of immigrants?
Thank you. Open season.
Well, I'll take the easy part. First of all, God bless you for the work that you're doing. It's wonderful that you're spending time, your free time, in those schools working with kids. There's no better thing that you can do. I think that I think that immigrants and other is something that's been demonized in every society from the beginning of time. And I think there's an element of what's happening now that's no different than that. I think there's another element, however, which you have frustration and an exhaustion with a system that people have been talking about in different ways for years that doesn't ever seem to change or seem to get fixed. And I think those two things combined can be insidious. And these kids that you work with are an example of what Senator Blumenthal was talking about, which is that there are people here who only want to make themselves better and make this country better, and do, objectively, provably do. So again, thank you.
An interesting story for CNN to follow up will be the number of firefighters from Mexico who have come to Southern California and the people from Mexico who will help rebuild.
Yeah. But I just want to say one more thing, because I think there's one more thing that John didn't mention, and that is you can't underplay the outrage factor that places like Fox and right-wing media have cranked up against immigrants. This isn't organically happening. Sure, has there always been some fear of the other? Yes. But if you add fuel to that and crank it up every hour of the day and focus only on crimes that have been committed by the small percentage of immigrants and just crank it up and get the outrage going. I have a friend who was a journalist, and she told me recently, she listens to much more right-wing stuff. She told me recently that she was a single issue voter. And I said, oh, what's that issue? And she said, immigration. I said, I'm sorry, you live in Larchmont. Your immigration is your only issue? And she said, yes.
They're flowing over the border from a Marinette.
But this is like, yeah. I mean, and so we cannot ignore the fact that it has also been turned into a big talking point.
But we cannot ignore that this is not a U.S. problem. Does anyone remember Brexit? This is a global issue that it way predates Donald Trump. Just to turn back the clock a little bit. It's been going on for about the last 20 years, and it started in Europe long before Donald Trump entered politics.
It is an old problem all around the world. It is an old problem in America. We have gone through periods when Literally, boats were turned away at the beginning of World War II. My dad came to this country in 1935 to escape the Holocaust, and he had not much more than a shirt on his back. He spoke virtually no English. He knew no one. This country gave him a chance to succeed. Likely, he would have been sent away today under some of the rules we have. And to answer your question, I think, as much as anything else, it is our broken immigration system right now. We need comprehensive immigration reform. We need border security, no question about it. And we have the technology to do it without building a wall. But we also need to provide a path to earned citizenship for the 11+ million people who have been here without proper documentation for decades. Many of them are working in places where you go. They are working for companies where you work. They're paying taxes. They have children here who are in our schools. And we need to find a way to give them the opportunity to have a path to citizenship, also more H-1 visas. You know, I could go down the litany of things, and it is doable. It's doable. We did it in 2013. I was one of the leaders of an effort that produced an immigration reform bill. It had border security, it had path to citizenship, it had many of the things that have to be part of an immigration passage now. It passed the Senate overwhelmingly, bipartisan support, and it never got a vote in the House of Representatives. Our country would be different today if we had taken advantage of that opportunity 10 years ago. And to answer your question, I think it is because we have a broken system of immigration, and yes, absolutely right. John is right. The fear, false fears, you know, the instances of someone here illegally, killing brutally, tragically, unacceptably someone, Laken Riley, bill now before the Senate is named after a victim of that kind of attack. But we have to be as rational and objective as we can about it. And I think CNN has, and others have done great work in trying to objectify this issue.
John, did he say that just right
It's pretty good.
about CNN?
Yeah, anytime someone says something good about CNN, I
There
think
you
you're
go.
dead on right.
There you go. Next question.
I think one of the major problems with our country is that the majority of the population tend to denigrate experts, science, anything that gives them a different viewpoint than what they have. How do we get people to accept that science is right and the experts, for the most part, know what they're talking about?
Thank you for your question.
Take it, Dan.
Dave, is it true that you've changed alliances and you're now for the Jets?
Well, I wish there was an answer to that question. No one on this panel has it other than pray and hope. Look, do you guys have any suggestions here?
Thoughts and prayers.
It's good luck. I mean, all you can do is shine a spotlight on the work that they do and the facts behind what they're saying, the work that goes in to proving the things that they've spent a lifetime trying to prove, and just hope. And just hope. You know, we all know people. Everyone has people in their lives who just say, I just don't believe that. I don't care what they say. And it's tough. It's really hard. All of you need to just tell people. I mean, this is one of those things that everyone needs to do their part and try to make everything better. So I'm counting on all of you. Thanks.
I have somebody to call out in the audience. It's going to embarrass the hell out of him, but I'm going to do it anyway. He had a lot to do with the design of the Hubble telescope. He's a scientist, and he's proud of it. And his name is Marty Yellen. Stand up, Marty. Well, he was here before. Next question.
Hi, this question is about the business of media. And it's really with the backdrop of a lot of what we've talked about with social media really being in a position to push news to viewers versus more traditional media that needs to attract viewers. So the question is simple: is the profit motive, is the business of media ever in conflict with telling the truth? And does the truth in a non-partial and the analysis of that truth in a sort of impartial way, is it profitable?
Look, yes. I mean, you put your finger on it, and I've mentioned this name. A lot of people in here don't. Alisyn and I both worked at Fox News, for those that don't know that, and CNN. And Roger Ailes changed this dynamic forever. He was the creator of Fox News, and he realized there was a lot of money to be made in the news business by giving 50% of the country news they wanted to hear. And he forever changed this system that we will never unchange. So yes, it's a major problem, but I don't think there's any fixing it. Sorry, I'm not picking on you. CNN and MSNBC are down 50% since the election. 50. So if you are a public company, which now I believe every news network is attached to or is a public company, there is no avoiding it. They all have shareholders, and they all have duties to those shareholders to make money. And largely speaking, whether you like it or not in this room, people don't want factual news. They don't. When Shep Smith, who is, I think, the best newsman of my lifetime, and I know Alisyn may think he's in that category other than John,
John's the best, but
let me say this, that we worked with at Fox, easily the best. Went to CNBC, and did a straight down the aisle, genuinely straight down the aisle, entertaining newscast every night. They were astonished at the lack of viewers. They couldn't believe it. They'd never seen people flee CNBC so fast. News Nation is trying-ish to do factual news. No one's watching. I haven't seen an example where people are fleeing to factual news. Do you disagree with me? This is a business. It is.
Okay, I have better news. I have a disagreement that I hope will make people feel better. So a hat tip to Brian Stelter. I get his newsletter every day. He's the media analyst at CNN, longtime student of media, and he's, in his recent newsletter, he outlined a whole bunch of nonprofit news organizations that have cropped up. So they're local news organizations. He gave some examples in different communities across the country: Mississippi Today, El Paso Matters, the Vermont Digger. Every state. Oh, you were excited about Vermont
I read the Vermont Digger. My mother-in-law lives in Vermont.
So you can contribute to these, and one of the places that contributes to them, and so in other words, this is one-stop shopping, the American Journalism Project. So my point is, there are all sorts of new projects and endeavors that are trying to take the profit, the whole profit incentive out of it and just get back to reporting the news.
Just two very quick things on that one. The other thing you can do is subscribe to Alisyn's Substack, which is the best news Substack that there is. So you should all
You're
do that.
You're a good man, John
today.
Berman.
Sign up, pay for the full year. Don't do the monthly option, pay for the full year. But the second thing, I'm not disagreeing with Dave at all, but I also wanted to answer that question more specifically. The problem that most news networks face, most people in television face, isn't what we're reporting or not reporting. The problem is people are just getting rid of their cable package. You're all cutting the cord because it's ridiculous. Now, my guess is that many of you in this room aren't doing it as fast as a lot of the other people in the country are, but people are cutting the cord left, right, and center. So the first thing they do is they get rid of their Comcast or their Cablevision, and they go to something like YouTube TV or Hulu Live, where they get almost all the stations at half the price, but then they don't want to pay that, so then they cut that down, and before long, once you start cutting the cord, then you don't have CNN or you don't have access to these things at all. That's what's hurting our business more than anyone who cares what we're saying or not. It's just they don't have access to her anymore. That's the enemy right now. And it's a problem. But it's not a problem that will be solved easily by any editorial decisions that, any at all, that we make one way or the other. What it does impact is hiring decisions and more accurately, firing decisions, where we're just a lot smaller now than we were 5 years ago. And unfortunately, in 6 months, we're going to be even smaller than we are right now.
Let's go to the next question.
And as Senator Blumenthal knows, there's always C-SPAN.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for showing up today, especially on a Sunday. My wife told me not to ask a question because I am in the great minority in this group. If I was sitting there, I would probably be the only Republican amongst you. So there is, I think, a lack of diversity that everyone is so enamored with. But it's not a question, and I hope you indulge me so that you can...
Excuse me, I have to interrupt. Yeah. We have a time limit here, so if you don't have a question,
no,
let's move on.
I have an email about Connecticut Public Television that I'd like you to opine on, okay? And this was on October 11th. A few days ago, I watched a panel interview between a female reporter and 4 Republican voters in Arizona. All 4 voters were not going to vote for President Trump, even though all 4 of them voted for him at least once. 3 of the 4 were going to vote for Vice President Harris. I have no problem with this one-sided piece as long as Connecticut Public Television is going to do the other side. Why 4 Democratic voters are not going to vote for Vice President Harris. I don't believe this is fair and balanced reporting will ever take place. Why? Connecticut Public Television is left-leaning and has a financial interest in favoring the Democratic Party for grant and other finance.
I do apologize for interrupting you, but we don't have time. Thank you very much.
But, well,
Yeah.
Well, why
Please
don't...
step away from the microphone. We're
why
done.
don't you opine on it? Because...
Yeah, I get the point.
I would not have sent this to Fox or MSNBC.
I understand. No, you've given us the point. I've gotten the gist of it, and I think that you're right that it would be really interesting as well to hear about Democrats who were not going to vote for Harris. Basically, in the news, as you know the expression, we don't do dog bites man. We do man bites dog. So in other words, there's no point in interviewing Trump voters who are going to vote for Trump. That's not that interesting. It is interesting to hear Trump voters who are not going to vote for Trump. So. Totally agree. Sure. Do it on both sides. Absolutely. I think that's a shame. I think that is a shame. I would like to hear it on both sides.
No, I agree with you. Look, I do think there's some truth to, I guess he's going to leave us. I do think there's some truth to that the public television is, without a doubt, leaning in the left direction. I don't think there's any question about that. Well, maybe John has a question. Maybe Dan doesn't believe me. I do believe there's a large faction of public television that is left-leaning and leaning on Democrats for financing. I do believe that's true, and I wish they'd do a better job.
As animated as the discussion is, we have time for one more question.
Something concrete for the senator. In case we can't find out from any other source, can you explain to us something you said right up front, that the critical FBI report is not going to be made available to the Hegseth confirmation hearing to the Senate?
I'm so glad you asked that question. There is no explanation other than, number one, it probably contains a lot of facts that the nominee and the transition team do not want you to know. Number two, it would jeopardize confirmation because it would embarrass a lot of Republicans who are planning to vote for him. I have been vociferous and vehement about the importance of making that FBI report available, not only to members of the committee, but to the public. We paid the FBI to do this kind of background investigation. It is routinely done on any appointee. The person who will be guarding that nominee incoming, the Secret Service, has background checks done on them. The person who checks your bags when you get on the plane. TSA official has a background check done on them. There's no explanation other than the politics of it. And I think it is really unfortunate because the Secretary of Defense has I'm on the Armed Services Committee. I have 2 sons who have served. I'm the ranking member on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I believe strongly in a really strong national defense. And I think the men and women who serve in uniform deserve a Secretary of Defense who is the best in terms of management and competence and character that the United States can provide. And our responsibility is to advise and consent. We should do it in an informed way. It should be informed advice and consent. So I could go on, but I think you're asking one of the essential questions that goes to the job of reporters. You know, we've been focusing a lot on, you know, whether the press is objective and neutral. Well, it's harder for them to do their job if information is withheld from them. And more in our government, we have a withholding of information. We have less and less available, and their job is harder. And I say that hoping that perhaps people will be hearing from folks who are unhappy about it, because we need a more transparent and open government.
I have a question. How do you feel about our representation?
You'll notice none of these folks were clapping.
We're neutral.
Dan, use your indoor voice. Again, thanks to the panelists and to our teachers. Stay tuned. The evolution of the country and its democracy continue under the watchful eye of the media. Let's all stay informed, and good afternoon.